It's been great to hear about different phases of clinical research, but it takes money, not just time, to get these research clinical trials off the ground running. And so, really the question is, how much does it cost, if we can answer it in such a simple way, to bring a drug or device to market? I don't know, Seth, if you want to kind of touch in on some of that.
Sure. And just drug manufacturing, that's an industry in itself. And then to try to bring it into the whole picture of how clinical research is involved, all of that, like you said, it costs money. And the amount of money that it costs to bring a drug to market, that it takes more and more money every single year. In like 20, the average cost to bring a drug to market was $1.3 billion. And then just even in 2022, that was estimated to increase all the way up to 2.3 billion. Now there's probably like a little bit of a low point or a lull there because in 2020 there was not a lot going on, but each year we see that more and more money is being poured into, and it's because you got all these companies that are kind of racing against each other. You got companies that have similar ideas, and whoever gets their idea, if it's trying to treat the same exact thing, the one who wins the race is going to be the one who kind of takes over the market. That's at least the idea. And aside from just the cost to make the product, which goes as far as formulation, packaging, and distribution, and that all still takes place in the clinical research side too, because they have to make the drug, they have to package it and ship it out to the sites that are actually participating in the trials. And then each site, they might be required to do certain types of testing. And if they don't have that equipment, then the sponsor or the company that's paying for or carrying out the study, they might have to supply certain sites with the equipment needed to obtain the information that they need. And then on top of that, each person that's in a clinical trial, depending on how it is made up, which Tiffany, you could probably talk a little bit about that too, but there's typically some sort of reimbursement to the patients, whether it's based on the time that they spend in study visits for the trial, or gas mileage that they use to try to make it to their appointments, or even like maybe reimbursement for surgical fees, or maybe they'll just they'll cover their surgical fees if they need rescue treatment, or just maybe surgical fees in general if their insurance isn't going to pay for something that might be involved, like if it's a study that goes along with cataract surgery or cross-linking, for example. And then on top of that, they have to contract certain sites to recruit the patient or the participants and follow the participants through the entire study. And remember that some of these studies can last, up to 4 years or even more. So that's a lot of time and a lot of money that goes into every single year to try to bring a drug up to market. Each phase, as we get through, whether it's phase 1, 2, 3, or 4, usually each phase requires more funding, which seems obvious because each phase, as you get higher up, has more participants and longer period of time.
Absolutely. So it's no surprise that clinical research is expensive, and it's only getting more expensive, is kind of what I took away from everything that you were saying. But it also dawned on me, we're throwing around some terms here that I think it's kind of worth scaling way back and just defining. So when we talk about clinical research, I'm hearing the word sponsor, we're hearing the word site, IRB. I think it's probably worth touching in on who those are, who those players are in each clinical research. So Tiffany, can you kind of help us and what their role is? So, what's the IRB? What's their role? What are sponsors? What are their role, et cetera?
Yeah, so much like Dr. Stoffren stated earlier, the sponsor is really the owner, if you will, of the study product. They generally are responsible for conducting or at least designing and developing the clinical study. Sometimes they might hire what we call a CRO, which will help run the study at different sites. But really, the sponsor is the sole person responsible to ensure that the study data, the design, it all makes sense, so to speak, in the hopes to get it approved. So once you have a study concept, design, written research protocol, depending on the level of the study product, meaning is this a study product that is FDA approved or FDA permitted? And if it's not, then the study sponsor will apply to seek basically permission from the FDA to run the clinical study.
I'm sorry to interrupt, but I think that's worth kind of touching on, maybe not. What's the difference between FDA approved versus permitted? Is there a difference?
There is actually. And so again, this is another podcast to explain this, but really FDA permitted clinical research studies is meaning if we're using an investigational device or an investigational drug, meaning a study product that is not FDA approved. And so sometimes we loosely will say the study is FDA approved to run using a drug or device that's not truly approved. And it's important to understand that the FDA will never approve of a new drug or device based on the study alone, meaning you have to make a deliberate attempt to apply for broader approval. And so when we run an investigational device or a new investigational drug, it's important to know the FDA permits or allows the sponsor to conduct the trial, but the product itself is not approved. And so there's a lot of regulations that goes into it. You brought up the IRB. The IRB will look to the FDA and some of their responding to allow the study to continue. So if you want to make it a hierarchical relationship, typically you start with the FDA. Again, if this is post-market, some of this stuff is not applicable, but if we're going to stick with a new drug or device example, the FDA must allow the sponsor to conduct the study. Sometimes they'll give feedback to the sponsor and make changes to the protocol. But once that has been approved, the next step is the sponsor will select its sites. Typically, clinical research sites like Vance Thompson Vision has a history of running clinical trials very well. It's important to make sure that each site generates the study data to the utmost, and it's really perfect or close to perfect as it can get, and timely. We want to make sure that when we're testing our subjects in these research studies that we're getting the data entered in an appropriate manner to, again, the sponsors in charge of safety and efficacy, and they need to closely monitor that data. So once we have an FDA allowed protocol, it goes to the IRB. The IRB is an independent ethical board that reviews every research protocol. And for protocols that are actively enrolling subjects and what we say prospectively enrolling subjects, the IRB is going to look at the entire protocol and will help us generate an informed consent for the study protocol. So the informed consent is one of the most important pieces of study paperwork that comes out of a study. Why? Because that is informing any potential research participant of all the risks and all the benefits of that study. So the IRB, again, is an independent reviewer. Their number one job is to make sure the safety of every study participant is met, meaning that the risks don't outweigh the benefits and the benefits don't outweigh the risks. It's a very equal relationship that must occur from the study protocol. And that informed consent is to basically educate that potential research subject on what the study's goals and objectives are, and asks the participant for their participation. Every subject knows that to partake in a research study, it's completely voluntary. At any time, you have the right as a research subject to decline participating, to withdraw consent, as we say, and to not go forward with study requirements. And we take that very seriously. So once you have the FDA approval protocol, once you have the IRB stamp of approval, then you can start to begin, in addition to other regulatory paperwork, you can start to begin enrolling subjects on that particular protocol.
You know, you brought up something really important, I think, and that's site selection. How would you, or maybe Seth, how would you encourage somebody or a practice, let's say if they were interested in kind of starting to raise their hand, what's a good way of trying to get involved in clinical research, or where would you go even?
Part of it is if you want to get started in research and you don't have a history of it, one of the probably most important things for it is to try to find an area that you are more passionate about, so that you can actually have the motivation and the drive. And then if it's something that you are more interested in, because the clinical research that spans across such a broad area where not only it doesn't have to be specific to drugs or devices that are implanted. It can be something as simple as like contact lens studies, which like if you have a rep for a specific contact lens brand that visits your clinic regularly, and if you voice interest in a clinical trial to them, they'll be able to send you down the line and get you in touch with a person who can start that conversation with you.
Yeah, I think that's exactly right. Kind of leaning on your connections that you have, with industry in your own clinic, and kind of understanding maybe areas of interest that they might have. And to your point, they're going to point you to somebody on their team who can help. But also, too, they know your clinic just, quite well. And so they're going to help ensure that you can deliver on some of those points that Tiffany mentioned in terms of making sure that you can meet the expectation of patient enrollment, meet the deadlines of collecting endpoints or getting to that. And so I think that's a great point, is just kind of starting right there in your office with your local connections.
Yeah. And then, beyond that, a place where there's, heavy presence of industry, like for example, the national optometry meetings, like Academy, for example, there's tons and tons of presence from industry on all different directions. And that's a huge resource to try to be able to open the door there, because you might be talking to someone who isn't necessarily involved in your region, but again, they know the person that they can get you in touch with.
Absolutely. I think too, it's important, you're the ones with boots on the ground. And if there was an idea, or somebody was seeing something clinically that they wanted to explore a little more, I think that that's also a great place to start. Just starting that conversation of, hey, I'm curious how this is impacting this, and talking with your industry partners to see, if there's anybody else out there who might have a similar thought process. And ultimately, maybe you generate your first investigator-initiated trial from that discussion, and then that gets the ball rolling for continued involvement in clinical research.